Good morning, everyone. It's a real great pleasure to see you all here this morning for the Real-World Evidence for Decisions Symposium of 2023, where we'll be talking about real-world evidence over the medicine's life cycle to inform HTA payer decisions. My name is Karen Facey. I'm a senior HTA advisor at FIPRA, and I'm facilitator of the Real-World Evidence for Decisions Learning Network. And we're here today to discuss how we can build better real-world evidence to inform HTA payer decisions about highly innovative medicines that are often potentially bringing great benefit to patients, but come with immature evidence packages and often high costs. So we discuss in this learning network the potential for use of real-world evidence to fill in gaps in clinical development and to resolve uncertainties post-launch. And we're keen to collaborate to consider whether the requirements we have for real-world evidence can be discussed not just across jurisdictions, but across stakeholders, and to understand how we can work together in transparency to build better real-world evidence and inform learning healthcare systems. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Hans-Georg Eichler, who many of you know from his esteemed career at the European Medicines Agency, and who is now with the Association of Austrian Social Insurance Institutes. So he's become a payer. He's crossed over the border, and he'll be co-moderating with me today. And Hans-Georg is one of the important members on our steering group, and you'll be meeting other members of the steering group and esteemed invited guests during the symposium today. I've welcomed you all here in the room, but we also have a number of people watching online, and this is being live streamed. Everybody will be able to ask questions, and I'll show you how you can do that in a moment. But you'll see from the agenda in front of you that we have a great range of sessions, looking first at policy this morning, then moving on to look at some new practice, how we might be able to build better real-world evidence in early access. And we do want this to be interactive. We are a learning network. We're led by the considerations of payers and HTA bodies, but we really think that all voices need to be involved in developing better real-world evidence. So during the sessions today, we'll have a couple of presentations, some discussants from different stakeholder groups will provide interventions, but you will be able to have questions here in the room or on Slido. So do take your cameras out if you're shy and you're not likely to raise your hand. And I'm showing the QR code here, or you can access it via Slido with the hash RWE tag. The recording of this session will be available afterwards, so you can share it with all your colleagues. And of course, we love to share learnings. So do go on to X or LinkedIn, use the hash Real World Evidence for Decisions hashtag, and share what you're thinking and your light bulb moments from this event. And finally, that exit down the end is just to say we're not anticipating any fire alarms today, but if we do, there are entrances at the back and at the front. And it is now my real great honor to invite Enrique Terol Garcia, who is coordinating advisor on health for the permanent representation of Spain to the European, to the stage to really give us an opening presentation about what's happening in the EU presidency here as Spain holds the presidency. Welcome, Enrique.
Hello, good morning to everyone. First of all, I am impressed for the number of brains that are here in this meeting room. Probably most of the things I am going to explain you are known by you. My idea here is not go through a long description of the presidency, and I will focus specifically on the e-health data space, which I understand that will be at the end the food of all your work, and is what we are now trying to agree with the member states, and in the close future also with the Parliament. Okay. Okay. This is the general priorities of the Spanish presidency. They are very nice one on protection of vulnerable people, preparedness and response initiatives for new health alerts, and alignment of the EU health agenda with the 2030 agenda and One Health approach. As in any presidency, we have two types of priority, what it's called the political priorities that are related with topics that we want to highlight and are also related with a big conference, a declaration, a support of a concrete way of doing things, and the regulatory part. The regulatory part is the part that we are doing here in Brussels. That's the part of my job, and I will be basically addressing this part if I am able to move it. Yeah, so here you have a long list of priorities. We are not going to look at that, are related with many areas related with health, with prevention, with tackling inequalities and discrimination. And we have one very important, which is digital health in the European Union. We had, sorry. Mm-hmm. Okay. This is, but it's not.
I think.
Okay. Probably it's better if you can pass the slide. So here you can see what we have are legislative actions. When we started the presidency, all these different elements were on our plate. And in 6 months, you have to go ahead with this and trying to do the best. No, the previous one, please. So one of the regulations we are now addressing is the European health data space. So what's our goal? Our goal, and this is a slide we put at the beginning of the presidency, is to reach a general approach, an agreement with all the member states during the presidency. And if everything is going well, if the Parliament is able to reach also an agreement, trying to start this negotiation with the Parliament. Please. We organize also in Spain, in León, only, I would say, project, still a project in the world addressing in a so exhaustive manner with so many components, what it's the management and making the health data available for many different uses. So in that sense, it's very good to be the first one, but it's also very tricky because there are many doubts around this. When you start to dig in the different elements, then you start to find, of course, problems, failures, also some I would say defensive records that are filled by the healthcare professionals, the way they are using the electronic health record, the way they are using the data, it's fundamental. And then we have all the IT dimension with all the technology, all the hardware, the software, the electronic health record. So in that sense, we are putting together three worlds that are sometimes disconnected. Next one, please. And what it's, I would say, the most important element here is that the idea is to unlock the potential of health data in Europe. And it's a pivotal initiative to foster collaboration, foster innovation, and have a data-driven healthcare system across the European Union. Next one, please. And there are These are the key, I would say, the key elements of the regulation. You know very well that one of the two elements we are tackling is the primary use of health data, what it's called primary use, what it's called secondary use. Primary use, very basic, what we as citizens will like to do with our data, with our health data. If I am as a citizen, I can go to Estonia, I have a problem, I go to an emergency room, and I will have capacity to access all my previous health data, and I can share that with my doctor in Estonia. It's very basic, the idea. It sounds good, but it's complicated. It's complicated. But that's one of the main goals of the regulation is to ensure that all European citizens are having better care, safer care through this system. The secondary use of health data, which is having anonymized data that can be used by researchers, companies, many different stakeholders to take advantage of this enormous amount of data. So the data lake is the typical thing we are calling, this is an ocean data. So it's not only, and then we have many elements that are related with this. Next one. And we have all the actors. Here we are talking about the different stakeholders. And here we are having many actors, and each of them is having a role, and it's having also the responsibilities and tasks to develop that are sometimes a bit complicated for some of them. Next one, please. So what we are coming is from a fragmented healthcare system that's known by everyone. It's nothing new. But when it's coming to data sets where we are and how we are hosting the data, the fragmentation is enormous. And the quality of the data, of course, is very heterogeneous. And because we are having, there is a lack of common interoperability standards, there are a lack of common data quality standards and criteria. And we need a unified framework. Next one, please. And then for that, what we are trying to do is promoting interoperability. That's one of the main elements of the regulation. Facilitating cross-border data exchange. So the regulation will apply at national level, but one of the main elements is ensuring that at cross-border level, we can move the data. And one element that is fundamental and is related with primary use is the empowering of patients, so that the patients that you as citizens will have control on your data, and you can do with your data whatever you want to do, which is also something that in the culture of the healthcare professionals is a change. It's a cultural change that will take also some time to be accepted by everyone. So I am, just go ahead. I will finish my presentation here. Go a bit ahead. Next one. Next one. Next one. Next one. I have too many. Next one. Here. Challenges and concerns. Do we have challenges and concerns? Yes, a lot. We have a long list. And we are now in the middle of the discussion. Actually, I cannot provide you information on what's the level of discussion now, but there is no secret that we are having hot issues there. Hot issues related with the, as you know, with the opt-out, opt-in issue, and that's very important for the data quality and the data sets usefulness. We have also many elements related with the transition periods when the data in the different member states, in the different data holder will be ready to be exchanged. And there is a big discussion as well with this, and everything related with the harmonization. With harmonization of the interoperability criteria, in which cases that will be harmonized, how we can keep the national competences to develop criteria at national level that are not contradictory with the European Union criteria. And of course, all the implementation with all the costs, the technical structures, etc. So I will stop here my presentation just to tell you that today will be an important day. Today, the presidency, we are going to issue in a couple of hours the final compromise text of the regulation that will be discussed next week, the last working party of the council, to see the final comments with the idea to discuss the final text in the Coreper on the 6th of December. So now that will depend on the member states. If we are able to reach an agreement, then we will have what it's called a general approach, the mandate to start the negotiation with the parliament. So we are really very excited about this moment. So next days will be fundamental for this. And we hope that we will have a good agreement on this. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Enrique, for sharing these ambitious plans of the Spanish presidency. And I think I can speak on behalf of all of us here in this room. At least we in this room, we wish you from the deepest of our heart the best of success for that important endeavor. So may you achieve in our interest what you are planning. Now, with that, thank you again. We move on to a plenary session, and that will be a policy context panel. And we have a slide, please, up with the participants. What we are going to hear is two 10-minute, and I emphasize 10 minutes, sharp, presentations, followed by two comments, 5 to 7 minutes each, and I emphasize that as well. And then all of you, whether you are in the room or whether you're following us online, will have an opportunity to ask your questions. So without further ado, I would ask our first speaker from the European Commission, Marco Marzella, to please give us an overview of the current initiatives of the Commission. We have no doubt.
I will make sure. So, okay. So let's go straight to. Well, here you are. So good morning. So I will take 30 seconds of these 10 minutes just to say how happy I am, because this is my first speech in the positions of director in DG Santé. So, you know, it is my first day, right? So essentially outside the offices, right? So thank you for the encouragement. I am not new, however, to this field because I'm coming from, say, a substantive number of years working on data and digital health in other departments of the European Commission. And I'm also, you know, deeply into the European health data space in a way or in another. Eric knows, because I mean, I think that the Commission really is trying to serve communities with these proposals, and this community is one of those that actually will benefit from the European health data space, as I guess you were referring to. And the reason is very simple, because you know, I think that we don't need to be reminded that under COVID we realized the importance of where is the health data from which I can actually draw insights. And that was an important push for us to get through a regulation that is opening up that data in a trusted way. So thank you, Enrique, for pointing out that bit. And, you know, I will not, you know, delve into the regulations also because I'm also looking forward to see the compromise text in a couple of hours. But I wanted to stress an important part of this regulation, which is you know, it goes beyond giving rights to citizens to have access to data and, let's say, control what's going to be done with their data also for research, innovations, and policy making. So it's not only let's say, creating the legal framework, but it's also creating infrastructures across Europe that will facilitate the sharing of that data. And in addition to enabling, you know, sharing data between hospitals, we will also need to enable the sharing of data between the permit authorities that will allow people to reuse that data. And this is one of the exercises. So in our opinion, let's say the implementation of the European health data space, I'm very optimistic, you know, and looking forward to implement it, has these three important components. One is finalizing, of course, the legal framework. The second one, it is to, define the procedures and the mechanisms to take it forward. And the other one is to make sure that we do have the infrastructural components to move it forward. So in terms of real world data and real world evidence, I guess that this field is not extraneous to other fields where one of the first questions is, let's agree on what we are talking about. And okay, fine, this is an important discussions, again, that takes place in general when it comes to agreeing not only on what we have to do, but also on the way in which we tackle the different issues that are related to data. And I'm talking about, not only the technological issues or what you can do with it, but it's also the ethical and the organizational aspects of it. And this also starts from, a very, the first level playing field that we know what we are talking about. So we do recognize the work that is being conducted, internationally on setting the scenes for the definitions. Now, these definitions obviously are going to be taken up in regulations, and so I will touch upon 3 of them, which are very close to your heart. So the first one certainly is the work that we are doing on pharma and pharma legislations, and you see, so the impact of real world, say, evidence here, it is not, say, new, and it is, in a way, recognized already in that bit of the regulations. And, our point, the point that I want to make in these 10 minutes is that it is already making an impact, real-world evidence, in part of this sector. So, and of course, if you move beyond the pharma, you get into the medical device space, and also for the medical device space, you do have the analysis and the insights that can be generated by real-world data as part of clinical evaluations per se, not only investigations, but also the analysis and in general, what we can do with it. So the question here, it is, what are we doing to accompany within these regulations the understanding and actually moving forward the way in which methodologically we apply the evidence that is coming out of real-world data. And there are policy initiatives that are complemented also by research initiatives. And I want to stress that's quite interesting. So at least from someone who comes from that background, say research and innovation, to bring to this constituency the fact that it's not a finished job. That the fact that there is research underpinning the role of real-world data/evidence, it means that we need to do also some steps forward. And certainly for the policy context, very well the issues. But what I also want to stress is that under research, we are also continue funding our understanding of the methodological framework that is surrounding the use of real-world data, with a call that is open and will close in April 2024. And of course, HTA is the closest, to your heart. You know very well the implementation timeline, which I will not describe, but you all realize that we are on the second part of this slide, and therefore, it is important that we collectively move forward, not only into defining the guidance and the text around implementing acts, but also that we are prepared to take up these discussions and decisions for the benefits actually of our citizens. And very well that at least for HTA we are limited to the clinical domains, but already that element of real-world evidence, it is already embedded into the discussions of the group that are now reflecting on guidance and / that will also be reflecting on implementing act. The economic evaluation is outside, of course, the scope of the HTA regulation, but notwithstanding that, I think that we recognize that importance, and we are continuing funding activities for you to keep the reflections going also in relations to the economic evaluation. So I hope that my 10 minutes will lead me to the slides with some conclusions. And I know at 1 minute, and I will use it for this important message. So first, 2 minutes, very good. So then the first one is that, I think that it's more than obvious that we in our services, it is very open to the discussions and facilitating the discussions at the level that needs to be facilitated. So one, we are here to listen, and I'm personally, this is for me a pedagogical tour, because I will be getting insights directly from those who are then using these technologies. For me, the mindset is we push forward the understanding on how to use it methodologically, but then somebody needs to use it. And it is this constituency that will inform us. Second, that we are already having the framework for enabling that discussions in the groups, for instance, in relation to HTA. And I guess that this constituency will also feed into that discussion. So my closing point is that we do look forward, and the fact that you see that we are today with you and listening to you, not only supporting you through the funds, it is also a call for gathering these insights, and it's a call for you to help navigate us through the second part of our list for the HTA implementing acts work. So thank you very much, and again, I'm very happy that this is my first presentations to such an engaged community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's a great privilege to have you here on your first day. So again, from the depth of our heart, we wish you in your new role the best of success. So the Commission will now be complemented, as is usual, by the Medicines Agency. So welcome, Patrice Verpila, to give us an update on, I guess, mostly the Darwin project.
Yes, thank you. I hope you can see me. Yes, despite the height of...
You point?
Yeah, but it's in that direction. Yeah. Okay, so yes, I will give you an update about Darwin EU, and for sure we'll focus at the end about more the interaction we have with HTA bodies and payers. But so that's the usual disclaimer. Let's move to this, which I always use as a starting point because I like to remind our visions when it comes to indeed 2025, which is really next door now, about real-world evidence. So our aim is definitely to enable the use and establish the value of real-world evidence for regulatory purpose, but beyond, also with different enablers, like you see the ones listed there. Data access for sure, including the HDS, which is a critical piece for us for success of this. Processes, standards, validating methods, trainings, and different use cases, and as well as internationalization, as Marco expressed also in one of the slides. So this vision has been published last year in this article co-written by Peter Hallett, Emma Cook, and also people from the networks. So this vision is also translated into the Big Data Steering Group Work Plan 22-25. So this has been a target that has moved all along, but it's not new. So 11 priorities, if we include the last one on vet, but you see that quite a lot of them are related to what we're doing to enable and to use and establish the value of real-world evidence via Darwin EU, the data quality framework, the data discoverability, the capacity to analyze, and so on. So in fact, the generation of real-world evidence at the European Medicines Agency and through the network is relatively new, I would say. It started in 21-22 mostly. But we often think about Darwin when in fact we have different pathways to do it. So for sure, Darwin, I will focus on this just in the next slides. But before moving to it, we have also access to some data sources like many companies or other stakeholders. So indeed, we do what we call in-house studies based on primary care data sets from the countries listed there: France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Romania, and the UK. We have also what we call the framework contract studies, meaning we have contracts with a certain number of research organizations and academic teams. that we can connect with and benefit from the network of data source they have access to and of expertise. And we have also Darwin EU, which is coming to the end of the second year. So the anniversary date is the 7th of February, because that's the time the contract has been signed with the coordinating center in 22, coordinating center based at the EMC, Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam. And what has been done since that time is that we have onboarded the first 10 data partners in 22. We are on the way to onboard 10 more data partners to expand the scope, I would say, of the access we have. And then we plan for 10 more next year and 10 more also in 24. And we'll see if we stop there or not, or if we continue. But more importantly, thanks to this, we were able really to start delivering. So it means that we've done now quite some studies in different multiple use cases, and I will come to this. So you know these two slides. I think it has been used so extensively, so I even put them together in one. So Darwin is indeed data analysis and real-world interrogation network. It's a federated network of data expertise and services. The other point is that the data partners, indeed, we started with the 10 there. I can tell you that we will expand. Indeed, we are onboarding currently 10 new with additional data from Norway, from Bulgaria, from Croatia, from Portugal, and so on. So indeed, expansion of the geographical scope, but expansions also in the type of data we will have access to, because we have indeed now access to more data in terms of primary care hospital data sets, genetic data with biobanks, and also EHR and registries. So a lot of things going on. How can we use this? So in fact, it's more or less the full spectrum of the possible use of real-world data when it comes to assessing product medicines and so on. So for sure, the basic, I would say, initial thing is definitely on understanding the context, the clinical context with disease epidemiology, clinical management, which means more or less how patients are managed, what drugs are they taken, for how long, and things like this, so also linked to drug utilization. Another piece that is not so used up to now, but we are working on this, is really indeed to help to design and assess the feasibility of studies that may be proposed by MAH or others, and also how representative and valid are the results when they come to us. And finally, one of the most challenging pieces is investigating association and looking at impact. I will say that when it comes to safety studies, we have quite a huge experience with this, but when it comes to effectiveness, it's a bit more challenging. And that's where HTA bodies and peers are important also for us to understand this piece. And the impact of regulatory actions, we've done already in the past quite some studies there to assess, for example, the impact of risk minimization measures in the framework of risk management plan, but that's something that we would do more in routine. So these slides, and sorry if I realize that it's not so nicely done with. So it's just to show you where we are. So it's a busy slides, but indeed, as I told you very quickly, phase 1 was the first year. So 22 with the implementation, the onboarding of the first 10 data partners, and the four first studies delivered. This year, we are coming to the end of the second year. It will be officially the 7th of February 25, but we're closer to this. So indeed, much more studies. As you can see, unfortunately, this is, it doesn't work. I wanted to highlight that the planned number of studies was 16. I can tell you we will most probably be around 18 or 19. Finalized by the end of the second year. So it shows that indeed we have quite a substantial increase in terms of data delivered, but also more data coming in. So next year will be officially the first year of operation, but we will still continue what we call the establishment phase for some of the committees, for example, because we need more use cases there to establish this. So in fact, there is a quite important increase in number of studies to be delivered, 72 in the planning, And when we will move to the fully operationalization of Darwin EU, you can see that we will be closer to 150. So quite an important scale up. But I can tell you, we have lots of ideas for this already. And hopefully we are also assessing, and this has been an important milestone, which is not there. We have delivered also our first report about what has been done over the last 18 months. And we plan for sure to deliver this report every year to show you indeed what we did and how it has been used. So that's just an extract of some of the studies. For the sake of time, I will not go through all of them for sure, but you can see indeed that in blue, more or less, these are related to EMA committee support, NCA for one of them, and also external collaboration with, for sure, the European Commission with the HTS, but also the ECDC for vaccines monitoring, and also these use cases, if it works, yes, sorry. About HT and payers, and I will move to this in my last 1 minute, right? So in fact, this was the output of a workshop that took place a year ago, more or less in October, which highlighted the need to address concerns regarding data quality and how this can be used for decision making. So for sure, I would like to remind that we have the EU data quality framework that has been endorsed finally by the CHMP a few weeks ago. So hopefully this will become, I will say, final version very soon. So I don't know exactly the date, but maybe soon. And I can also tell you that our objective is to decline this data quality framework to more, I would say, focused areas. And I already reviewed the first draft dedicated to real world data. So it will come also most probably next year with a specific deep dive on real world data. The other point was about which type of research question can be addressed. And for sure, it depends on the available data that we have access to. So that's why we are continuing to include additional data partners to expand the scope of possibilities. The other point was indeed to say, let's focus first on what seems feasible based on the current state of the EU, instead of indeed trying to build something that finally will be unfeasible, and then the lesson learned will be more limited. And the last point is about the transparency and the registries. So in fact, how do we manage this? So I will just do this. In fact, we have decided to move into two use cases, one about effectiveness of medicines, which is a new area for us, specifically when it comes to comparative effectiveness, to support indeed the needs from HTA bodies and payers. And one study is currently under development with a protocol stage about the effectiveness of drugs, I would say immunotherapy and chemotherapy in non-small cell lung cancer patient. And the other one, which is about natural disease history, and more specifically on multiple myeloma, where we got the results. I would say the report is under finalization currently. And if you have any questions, I will be happy to take some. So thanks a lot.
Thanks very much, Patrice, for and plans. You have now heard from official Europe what they are doing in that space of real-world data. We will now ask representatives from two important stakeholder groups to share their reflections. What do you have to say? And we start, of course, as it should be, with patients. And could I please ask Dimitrios Athanasiou from the World Duchenne Organization to come forward? You can either sit down, whichever you prefer, or come to the lectern. You have no slides. The commentators have no slides. Yeah, if you want the two speakers, please don't give him that feeling of loneliness. No? Yes.
First of all, I would like to say that I'm trying to keep it very, very short on this. So I'm using the discussion. We want everybody to hear. We'll be very close and we have I've heard very interestingly about this ocean of data. I come from rare disease, and I can tell you it's not much. Don't even have labels. And these schools are separate. So nobody wants to connect these schools with each other. So as a global community, we said that we were trying to be different. So we invested heavily in research. I think it's quite interesting to discuss the real evidence on an example. So our organizations are formed around 50 and 50s. So 70 years later, we use 65 models. Two different varying the things. And 60 years later, which is the best. So what we try to do? Try to put the data. The real data, see how our voice is doing. We failed. So what was the next step? I think last week we got the drug defined. So today you got to cover this needs because we were able to participate. Just to have an idea. That was actually financed by the Commission, heavily by
organizations at the defense ministry, let's say in the US. And it got approved in the EMA and in the FDA. At least we have a positive letter. We are waiting for a couple of weeks. Having said that, the same community has a patient representative supporting the Darwin and another patient representative supporting the big data steering group. Experts on what they do. I can guarantee you they're much better than I am. What we face, though, is that we cannot bring the data inside the EMA. So imagine a patient community from rare diseases, I think you can understand this, developing from animal models to AVVs, to clinical trials, to exoskeletons, to PROMs, to digital outcomes, and not being able to bring your data inside the agency. This is very difficult to explain to our community members. And explain to our community members, we also have another, let's say, last period challenging situation where we have something, a product, let's say, that's under evaluation. We have a post-marketing registry that's running for 12 years. So all our children in COVID, 10 years, in COVID, in a rare disease, are monitoring our centers of excellence, bringing the real-world data, real-world evidence. And I would say that the answer we received in the evaluation was not, let's say, satisfactory. For us, it's indifferent if the products at the end, they work. We need to know if they work or they do not work. And that's why we need this data. But what we need more, we need to make and to continue the trust we have in the system. Because I've heard yesterday that, now it's the moment for real-world evidence, the discussion, the momentum, etc. No, this is past. This is old news. Now we have to move forward to actually implement it and build it in a frame of trust. Because you see the results of lack of real-world evidence fast enough in COVID. I don't have to remind you. And imagine what happens to a smaller situation, to smaller populations, where these little, little pools of data don't have really patients inside, but they have, little dragons inside. So maybe my contribution to this discussion is I would like to hear from you that you are all experts, how we can actually, what we evangelize, what we can actually perform, and where the patient organizations are fitting in this, because I really think that at the end, this is our data. You can call it primary, secondary. If we don't have the buy-in, and if I don't have the buy-in from my patients, that I will ask them to contribute the data, they will not give it. So it's going to be an empty pool. Thank you very much for your minutes. Thanks.
Thanks very much for that patient perspective. We now move on to another constituency. And you can see on the screen Alexander Nuts. He was meant to be here, then his train got cancelled. So Alexander, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you very well.
We can hear you and see you very well. So please give us your perspective, share your reflections on what you have heard. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Hans-Georg. It's a great pleasure to be here to speak about a very important topic. And apologies, first of all, I couldn't be with you in Brussels this morning. I mean, real-world evidence is really a topic which I think we have seen few topics which have been moving on such a speedy pace in the healthcare industry over the last 10 years. I think if we would look 10 years back, we wouldn't, most of us wouldn't know about real-world evidence. And today we're discussing so much about the value of this data, but also about the difficulties of finding the right methodology so that all stakeholders see their views reflected in the data set. So talking about real-world evidence is really important. We see real-world evidence actually in all policy initiatives, as we have heard from the European Commission and also from the Spanish presidency. It is in the European health data space. It is in the pharma package. It is also discussed in the EU HTA. We've also heard from the agency, from the EMA, that there are not just practices. The EMA is not just asking industry to collect post-authorization safety and efficacy studies, something we have seen at the regulatory level developing with the pharmacovigilance legislation, but also the agency is conducting pilots to make sure that there is interaction between payers and regulators, and we think that this is actually the right way forward. We've heard from Dimitrios that especially in areas of important high unmet medical needs like Duchenne, where we've seen products authorized in the US, but not so many products available in European markets, that the value of real-world evidence is important and that we need to have a discussion, not just about access in the pharma package, but also about how can we make sure that we use real-world evidence better to actually fill data gaps, both at the regulatory and also at the EMA level. Let me say, first of all, that we as industry, that we value very much the fact that we have a multi-stakeholder discussion with real-world evidence for decisions, because ultimately it is of critical importance that we take all stakeholder views into account when we are defining a data set, which in an ideal scenario, and that's not always possible, we know that, but in an ideal scenario meets the demand of all stakeholders involved, be it patient, be it regulated, be it HTAs and payers, and also ultimately physicians and industry. So we value as industry very much that we have a recognition of real-world evidence by all of those constituencies. We value the discussion about methodology in real-world evidence for decisions, because as I said before, it needs to be a robust data set in order to be valuable for all key decision makers. And it is really important that we have this, that we are conducting this exercise from the multi-stakeholder perspective. Let me talk very briefly, and I know we are running out of time, but about 3 examples where real-world evidence has been used over the last couple of years. One example is certainly the pandemic. We've seen that in the development of vaccinations for COVID-19, real-world evidence has played a tremendous role. We had to work on a speedy in a speedy way in order to get vaccines to patients, to get vaccination rates up, and we have learned at this point in time a lot from Israel, where the vaccination rate was much higher than in some European markets at a certain point in time. So we've been learning a lot from what vaccine is the right vaccine for which type of patient population. And that was real world evidence at the end of the day. But also in regulatory decision making, we had to be speedy because the virus was mutating. We had to be speedy in decision making to make sure that we get a vaccination for the right mutation. So in that respect, real world evidence has played a tremendous role in regulatory decision making, but also in the right practice to find the right vaccination for the right person. Rare diseases, we have learned a lot that we very often deal with small patient populations in ultra rare diseases, and it is important to take a look at the time when the product is released to the market, is used in wider patient populations. So for closing our eyes for that data, which is generated at that point in time when we get broader databases, is probably not the right way, especially in rare diseases. And ultimately, it is increasingly important also when it comes to value-based pricing, because we do see many areas where we have chronic treatment options and where we also have gene therapies. When we talk about hemophilia A, we have a gene therapy coming to European markets, but payers want to see the long-term effect. And when it comes to outcome-based agreement, pay for performance models, it is really important that we have a robust data set to monitor the effect of the gene therapy over a longer period of time, because only then I can benchmark what is better. Is it the chronic treatment option or is it the cell or gene therapy? So those are three very concrete examples that it needs to be a multi-stakeholder initiative, because the latter part is certainly something which is driven by HTAs and payers. Payers would want to know what they pay for their medicine. And we appreciate very much as industry the fact that we not only have this initiative with real-world evidence for decision, which allows for a multi-stakeholder discussion, but that we also have the opportunity, let me say that very clearly, to be allowed to close some data gaps, which are clearly defined and which are then later on closed over time with real-world evidence on the basis of a robust methodology. Because at the end of the day, it is better to close those data gaps later on than saying no for reimbursement or no for access at the regulatory level early on, because there is a lack of data. I would like to close clearly with the statement that we are not willing to use real-world evidence as a replacement for randomized clinical trials, but there are situations where randomized clinical trials are not possible or the sample size is too small. And in these spaces, real-world evidence has a critical role to play. Thank you very much. And apologies for not being with you today in Brussels.
Thank you, Alexander. We could hear you perfectly well. So thanks all four gentlemen. You have now heard both from European officialdom and from important stakeholders some reflections. The floor is open for discussions now. If you are in the room, please just raise your hand. The microphone will come your way. Please always say who you are and the organization you represent. And if you are following us online, please use the Slido. And I understand there is at least one question already in there. But I will first go, is there a question from the floor here in the room? If not, let me break the ice. All of you talked about data. Sorry, was there a hand up? Oh, sorry, I didn't. I'm very sorry. Sorry. You shouldn't be timid. Raise it like that. Yeah, wave.
I'm sure others will join and timidity will decline. Actually, it was a question to Marcelo, because thank you. First of all, thank you very much for your presentations. In terms of the guidance, is there guidance also in the discussions we hear for industry as well? Because that's where sometimes the lack of alignment and understanding of what is needed early on. Obviously, data collection is resource intensive, and to be able to ensure that there's alignment between what's needed to a certain extent between the regulators and then the HTA payers. Obviously, there are different kind of objectives of those authorities, but in terms of the guidance, I'd be interested in the guidance which is available also to the industry, who is obviously a key player in this development.
Well, I guess that the work of the HTA groups and coordination groups will actually touch upon elements which would certainly address industry, but I would not single them out. I mean, I guess that the point here is to make the work, collectively going towards an understanding, which means, I guess that yes, and I'm looking here, I know that there are representatives of that community, so they may, you may take the opportunities to have that discussions. I would say that the point, is to take the different perspectives, including, for instance, the patients net. So I expect that to happen in a way. Now, I don't know whether this will be to the satisfactions, or complete satisfactions of the stakeholders in relation to your questions, but I guess that so my hunches will be yes, that there will be elements of that discussions in the coordination group.
Thank you. There are two questions. Sorry, yes, I'm sorry.
Just, I'd like to ask, to add, sorry, is it working? Yes. That when it comes to, for example, real-world data, real-world evidence, the agency is developing guidance or reflection paper. One is currently on AI, for example, which is another topic, but still connected to some extent, which is currently open for public consultation. We've also released just 2 weeks ago what we call the Methodology Working Party work plan, and it's also open for public consultation. So I would say dare to go there to make comments, because it will guide us also on what kind of guidance document you need, and we can work on it so that it is also the collaboration and the way we may use collectively indeed real-world data and real-world evidence. So I would say feel free to do so, because it's also important for us to get this feedback.
Well, thank you for that reminder that as active citizens, we should contribute. So I saw 1, 2 hands. 1, 2, please. Please say who you are and your organization.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Yanis Natsis, Director of the European Social Insurance Platform, the European umbrella association that brings together statutory social security institutions, including, obviously, the public health payers. And I think this is a wonderful discussion, and congratulations for fostering this discussion, because it comes at a time where there are already the negotiations on the European legislation, on the pharma legislation. And I think we all agree that we need to strengthen also the side, obviously, of the payers in order for us to become informed strategic buyers, as Alexander said online, so that we know exactly what we're paying for, and also the real added therapeutic benefit of the new products, and who they work for well and who they don't work for well. We're obviously very much supportive of Darwin. I have a question for Patrice. What do you think will be the reaction of the companies? Of course, we heard from Alexander, but this is Darwin is trying to break new ground, especially when it comes to having more information on comparative effectiveness, which is obviously key for us. And that is because we fear that even when it comes to the implementation of the HTA regulation, what will happen then? We will see once again highlighted the evidence gaps that we have at the time of the marketing authorization. So how do we make sure? Because obviously randomized clinical trials have their problems, have their issues, but nevertheless, we do not want to have a further erosion of the evidentiary requirements at the time of the marketing authorization, because that obviously creates problems down the road for all of us, for HTAs and payers. Thank you very much.
So I will say from a regulatory perspective, it's always a bit challenging for me to talk for the payer side, because it's not my road there. I will say the standard is still the same. To some extent, I will say indeed the initial marketing authorization, you will get it if you have indeed the proper randomized clinical trials performed, even if I've understood what you've said, indeed, Alexander, that there are sometimes some possibilities to do it a little bit differently. So when it comes to the real-world evidence, then it's always a complement. It will never replace, what we consider still as a gold standard. So you have to take this as a given, I will say. And for sure, again, there may be some adaptation. Then I will say, and we may discuss this also later, there are different ways also to take into consideration potentially what you could need next. So which means that indeed we often see you need first regulatory approval, and then you go to the next level, which is HTA bodies and payers and things like this. But I think that there are also quite some opportunities to interact with all of us. We have joint still session where we can discuss all together. There will be also joint scientific meetings where we will still interact, where we can express what will be the need from the regulatory side and the needs from the HTA and payer side, and try to make it together in one. I think we should move from indeed these studies for one, these studies for the others, maybe to something which could be a bit more modular to some extent. We could think that indeed we do one study and some objective will be more for regulatory purpose, some other objective will be more for your HTA and payers needs. So this could be also one way to avoid the multiplicity of things and to make it a little bit more useful for all the different stakeholders.
I was introduced here as a payer. You refer to our organizations as buyers. And we both know what the difference is. The problem is we still act as payers. So if your worry is that the evidence standard goes down because we now have a new source of information, let's say, who is to be blamed? Us. So maybe if we speak up in a louder voice, in a uniform voice, maybe we can prevent that from happening. But for that to happen, we as buyers or payers have to speak up. We have to engage in these processes. We have to be part of this process, and then we can make it happen. I hope that complements the other answers. Now, there was one more. Yes, the gentleman in the back, please say who you are.
René Westhoves. I'm a rheumatologist, emeritus professor at the KU Leuven, and I am in charge of the College of Orphan Drugs here in Belgium and the Advisory Commission for Early Access. When I look to your presentation, there are for me as a clinical scientist, is a key problem of quality data. So randomized trials are fine, and we all know that they are just informative in the very beginning. They are telling us something compared to placebo and so on. They don't tell us anything about effectiveness. So we should gather valid data, quality data. When we now look to daily practice and we just see, because there was a slide that we are now with this real-world evidence looking to standard of care. We know now, we will try to know what is the standard of care. But we should realize that the standard of care that is currently practiced is perhaps not the optimal standard or not the optimal way to treat. So we should be very careful that what we measure is quality and is informative to improve. And there are other things that, for instance, if you the typical problem of bias in daily real-world evidence is a huge issue. So there is a way to overcome, and in rheumatology, for instance, we currently practice a lot of strategy trials. So something in between daily practice, real-world evidence, and randomized controlled trials. So just I would say, the alert is, let's go for quality. And I'm not against, I'm really pro. I'm pro the structure to go to it, but it can be used in a false way and in a very qualitative way. That's what I would like to say.
So I think you alluded to the garbage in, garbage out problem. Maybe the EDMA first. This is a scientific question.
So I agree with you in terms of quality, and you have seen I've talked about it already during my presentation, and that's why we've developed this data quality framework, because that's almost a starting point. If you don't have the high quality data, at least that will fit some of the standards we need to be able to take an informed regulatory decision, then this will be an issue. And we are very good, I will say, and I'm an epidemiologist, I'm the first to say this, to highlight all the limitations that we see, but we should also remind that there are sometimes strengths that are also important. I will say RCTs are the gold standard, but they have also some limitations. And we know that in some setting, it's a bit more challenging, but still the way to go. So I would say it's the same for the real world evidence. Once again, it's a complement. Yeah. And most of the time, decision is not taking on just one piece of evidence, but that's the overall, I will say, elements or holistic evidence that you can have that may help. So there may be indeed some potential issues in one, but hopefully there will be different types of issues with another one. So all in all, you may have enough information to take this decision.
Do you want to chime in, Marco? And then Alexander.
Okay, then for Alexander first.
So Alexander, we note you raised your hand, is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to go first. I think, quality of data is key also in real world evidence. And this is what we are discussing in the initiative. On the other hand, we have to consider also who is generating the data. And I think these are the physicians. So we need to bear in mind that for the physician to fill in data sheets is additional work. And we've heard a lot of times that we need to be reasonable also in terms of what is the size of the patient population in the registry in order to make it usable. And I'm sure these discussions will be taking place at the EMA level, for sure at the regulatory level. But we need to make sure that we can't always guarantee as industry that there is 100% of the patient treated to be in the registry necessary, because especially when it comes to gene therapy, there might be a loss to follow up and the patient is well treated by the gene therapy, not going back to the physician. That's not the fault of the ones being in charge of putting the registry data on the table, which is industry. The other point is that it's also not always possible for industry to activate physicians to make sure that there is a full data set. So the devil is very much in the detail. This is what I wanted to show with these two examples, but we are very much aligned that this needs to be a robust data set. We need, in an ideal scenario, align interests from the regulatory level, from different payer groups, from different countries. Not always easy, but the quality of data is key. I just wanted to bring two examples that it cannot always be the 100% of the patients being included in the registry, because what can I do as industry if the patients don't want to be follow up? What can I do in industry if the physician is not willing to spread data sheets. I just wanted to bring those two very concrete points. Thanks.
Thank you very much. There are now a couple of questions in Slido.
I think the
Marco, did you want? Sorry, I thought you did. Yeah. Oh, sorry. And then we come to the Slido questions.
Yes, I mean, with the background on data, I think when we talk about quality, this is also one of the topics where we need to understand what we mean by quality, you know. So, and I'm very happy because I mean, I think Emma, with the methodological framework around the data, understanding of quality data, it is, you know, essentially pushing forward that domains. But you know, we all know that when we talk about evidence, we talk about experiencing data, and you know, you experience data when you have done that work on information. So the first things that you have to do when you have the data is you have to structure it, and we have to agree on the source and the way in which we structure. I'm saying this because the enabling factor of the European health data space regulation should be known to you in full. Right? So that's what we have in discussions now, parliaments and council is the element that will enable that analysis to be done with the technological solutions that it serves everyone. So the regulation and the infrastructure that will follow, it is to structure that data and to structure the source in such a way that then informed decisions on that data can happen. So the Darwin and the work, for instance, that we are doing on the European Electronic Record Exchange format, it is propedeutic for anyone who wants to then generate insights of data. And the story of having that interoperability clear at the European level is paramount if we want to discuss about evidence. So I really look forward for concluding the discussions on the regulations, because this will really take you to the next stage of using that data, especially him.
So I think one topic came up now, that is, how do we motivate healthcare professionals to enter reliable data? And maybe that is a separate discussion we come back to, but let's first please read the Slido rule questions.
No, before that, I'm going to put the patients in the center again, because of course we are talking about patients contributing to registries. And Demetrius, you talked to us about that long history you have in Duchenne, and I think you wanted to make a comment on this.
Yes, I would like, in order to be in the center, I have to switch with Marco. But yeah, I think there are a couple of items that I've heard, for example, about the uncertainty that Yannis talked, and he's very right. The uncertainty also applies to the data, and also applies to the standards of care. And especially as you move to the rare diseases, you see this. So in order to have these initiatives, because these are parallel initiatives that they touch from time to time in reality, successful, we also, I think, we have to think out of the box. And you're discussing, for example, how do we persuade our clinicians that they have 10 minutes to see a patient? You don't. And the reality is that usually you have a nurse that is passing some kind of information with a typo error and the lack of knowledge, and so it is a problematic equation. But we can think outside the box, and we can use what we have. For example, the one model that we used, first of all, we certified the centers that are providing the care, because what you see is that, yes, there is no standard of care in all Europe the same. You have a lottery, it depends when you live, depends which hospital you are monitored, which is your clinician. This is a new standard of care. What kind of data will you collect, and how my data in Athens is comparable, for example, to the one in Great Ormond Street or to the one in Motul? I cannot tell you. Or actually, I can tell you. That's very different, the data. But this is the one topic. So the one can be, for example, to reverse the model of GDPR. So what we try to do, we create the patient lockers, etc. The labor work is done by patient organizations and the patients themselves. Then they invite a clinician, which in 5 minutes can validate what we uploaded as data, and then this becomes clinical data, and it can be used in a regulatory process. It's another issue that we cannot bring it to you, but that's. So you have various, let's say, tools. I think if we need to think out of the box, we need complex solutions for complex challenges, and not doesn't one size fit all. Thanks.
Thank you, Demetrius. And we've got several questions, all for Patrice. So there's a lot of interest in Darwin EU. And one of them is, in a sense, related to data quality. And then I'm going to wrap up the other three questions together. So the first one is Darwin EU still based on the concept of using the OMOP common data model and federated analysis?
So short answer is yes. And we have a reason for this. Indeed, it's because the data stays local. It means that there is no transfer of the data to the EMA. So that's indeed one way for us to ensure that when we do these multi-database studies, in fact, we apply the same common protocol, the same standard analytics, and then you get the results back to the coordinating center, which is aggregating the results together before reporting back to the agency. So yes, and we know there are some limitations to using a common data model, but that's the way we can ensure so speed and standardization.
And we know that a number of member states, including Finland, we've got Pia here in the audience, are taking on board OMOP as well and seeing it. It's really becoming the standard core data model.
And I will say even Darwin EU is helping some of these data partners to move to that standard.
Hopefully.
So it's also one way also to improve this within Europe
And
may benefit to the HTS later.
And that's how we undertake good collaboration, I think. And the other question is really about who, it says, are these studies from Darwin EU going to be reviewed by external experts, and how are they going to be used? So are they going to be used for regulatory decision-making or for information about methodology advances, or for example, for representativeness? How are they going to be evaluated and used?
So reviewed, I would say it will depend. Indeed, we are when we work with the different committees based on the request that we got. In fact, there is always a study team. So we work on indeed defining precisely and clearly the research question. That's the starting point, looking at the feasibility, and then moving into the study itself with a study protocol and the study report. And all this is transparent, meaning that we also make publicly available. We disclose indeed in the EU Pass Register that will become soon, beginning of next year, the EMA/HMA catalog of non-interventional studies. So here you will find all the Darwin studies, which are either completed or ongoing with the study protocol, and at the end, the study report. There is an additional step in the review when it comes to the complex study. So here I'm going into a bit of the details, but indeed, when a study is a bit more complex, so we have certain categories, then the industry is also part of that review. So we share the study protocol with the different MAH who may be linked to a study. I would say if it's a disease epidemiological study, then there is no product into it. So for the moment, there is no link. But when we are looking at indeed like an SLC for payers and HTA bodies, indeed with immunotherapy and chemotherapy, then we will share the protocol up front with the industry, and they will have time to review, and we will implement or not some of the comments, and they will get also the report at the end. So there is a mechanism in place, thanks to the fact also that industry like patients associations and so on have a seat at the Darwin EU Advisory Board. So that's one way also to keep them informed and involved in some of these studies.
Yeah.
And the last point, sorry, where you were saying about how it's used. Hopefully, yes, our objective is that it's used. If we are not just doing studies because we like to do it, even if it's, I like to do it since a certain number of decades, I will say we are doing it because hopefully it will add some value into the decision. So we try to link as much as possible the studies we do with some procedures. Not all of them, because at the beginning, this was mostly some use cases to test also the system and how we can work together collaboratively and things like this. And that's where we are, for example, with HTA and organizations and payers. But hopefully, yes, most of the work we are doing is used within a specific procedures or to help to understand what may come next.
That's great. Thank you very much, Patrice. And I'm going to hand back to Hans-Georg, who's going to ask the last question, which I think is going to be shown on the screen.
By the way, if anyone is worried about whether EMA documents are ever reviewed, as an ex-EMA, I can assure you that under review is not the problem. It's over reviewing to death. Sorry to say that. Okay, now, there are 4 esteemed members on this panel, and they will all get the same question, and everyone will have a 1-sentence reply. You know what? 1 sentence ends on a full stop. So, where do you see the greatest opportunity for collaboration to build better real-world evidence for decision-making? I start, as I should, with a patient representative. 1 sentence.
Maybe 2-3 words. I think transparency is one. Cooperation, meaningful cooperation, impactful cooperation and measurement, and building the trust.
Thank you. That was quick. Alexander, we can't. Oh, here we can see his picture.
My biggest opportunity would be in the relationship between the payer and industry to ensure that in the future we have more opportunities for value-based pricing through pay-for-performance models and so on.
Wonderful. Thank you. Patrice, so the Commission gets the last word.
I would say early engagement. It's always worth to come to us, I would say, and even jointly. And as I said before, we have that opportunity. So early engagement to ensure that we co-building together. And then at the end, I will take your term again. It will help to improve trust and increase acceptability.
Very good. Marco.
Then I would say that the opportunity probably is that we do collaborate together to create the enabling conditions that will allow these collaborations to work. And, that's where, we really look forward for your input, because, if we get a bias in the enabling conditions, then most of the questions will not be answered. So I guess that, this is rather a call for you to get very much engaged with the discussions that is taking forward now in creating these enabling conditions.
Thank you for 4 short, crisp, and actionable summaries. Very well done. Please give our panel a big round of applause. So thank you, the 3 gentlemen here. Thank you, Alexander, for taking the trouble in spite of the technical difficulties. With that, we close this session, and I encourage you to keep on the discussion during the break afterwards. But before the break, we will hear from Karen about the Real-World Evidence for Decisions Consortium work in 23. Over to you.
Well, I'd like to thank that panel for really setting this up beautifully, because I'd like to answer the Commission by saying that I think real-world evidence for decisions provides the platform for the dialogue we need for collaboration. And I'm just going to give you an overview of what we've been doing in 2023. And we begin that work by looking back to where we were a year ago. This symposium has become an annual event, but we like to learn from every dialogue we have. And so we created 10 key takeaways from last year, which we published on our website, and you can see them here. And 5 of them were really about continuing to build trust. So that word has been key today. And that's about building trust among all stakeholders, particularly recognizing our need to engage with payer networks. And it's great to have already heard from ESIP this morning. And we continue to engage through the meetings of the Competent Authority for Pricing and Reimbursement, which we were invited to recently. Our engagement with the European Medicines Agency continues to be key, not just for Darwin EU, but as we talk about post-launch evidence generation and the potential for alignment with post-authorization efficacy studies. Clinicians, it's like we've set this up in advance, but we didn't. We've just heard the voice of a clinician earlier. We need to hear more from clinicians about the burdens of data collection, how we improve the quality of data collection in the field, and really support a learning health system. And of course, we were all struck last year by the patient engagement, which said, I'm fed up of hearing the terms patient centricity. It's just tokenistic. We need to get to co-creation. And as Dimitrios has just shown us, it's not necessarily co-creation, it's patient-led. And we tried to act upon this year. We're led by a multi-stakeholder steering group, which has a strong HTA payer group. And we added 2 patient representatives. And we're very grateful to have Antonella and Chris Sotorelis join us in the steering group and here with us today to join Simona Boselli from Eurordis. We were also joined this year by Eric Sutherland from OECD and by Ashley Jackson from Etion in the US, because we are beyond the EU. There are a few of us Brits involved, but we've also got a number of Canadians. We have a wide range of people, and these people drive the work we do. We are payer-led, but we are multi-stakeholder, so we are trying to collaborate together with generous sponsorship from a range of companies and UCOPE. We work within what we call a multi-stakeholder community. You can see here the countries that have been represented in our meetings this year, the range of organizations, and we're always open to new members to join our network. We try to publish reports of what we're doing, and this work began back in 2016 when Yoda Kok, who's in our audience today, former CEO of Inami Riziv, the National Institute for Health and Disability Insurance here in Belgium, said, I can see these high-cost technologies coming over the horizon, but I can also see the digitalization of our health services. How can we bring these things together to make sure that we're generating better evidence to understand the values of these technologies? So Yo asked FIPRA to run some roundtable meetings, and they have grown into this multi-stakeholder network 2020 paper. And it's interesting that I presented to you last year the pillars which now drive our work, and they are the things you have been talking about. They are data quality, data methods, trust and transparency, but policy and partnership. They are the 4 things which drive all the things we do. But we know that all stakeholders need to be involved in this discussion, and we're pleased to recognize that other people understand that too, because our paper about stakeholder actions was actually one of the 10 most downloaded in the International HTA Journal this year. So what else did you tell us at the end of last year? Well, you told us about the importance of the HTA regulation, and I don't need to stress that. We've all seen the flurry of activity of implementation, and we all know we only have a year to go. We also recognize that we need to raise the payer voice about what the priorities are for real-world data. We need to start talking more about cross-border data strategies, as Dimitrios indicated, and we have a particular focus on post-launch evidence generation. We have seen more innovative payment models coming in the last year, particularly for advanced therapies, but we need to be sharing learnings across border and aligning those forms of agreements where we can, and overall just coordinating and sharing learnings. So if I look at what we've done in 2023 to sort of enact those takeaways you gave us last year, we've continued to have our invitation-only roundtables, and I'll talk about those in a minute. We've had webinars which are focused on the areas of the HTA regulation that will be subject to the joint clinical assessments, so cancer and ATMPs. Really excited to engage with the cancer lead, Christian Chomien, who leads the cancer mission, talking to us about the house of cancer data and how exciting that's going to be. Data that is available to patients to help them make the decisions about their best care, but also available to decision makers. We also do a range of policy works, and here's where I thank many of you in the room who are on our steering committee and who we invite in to be part of conference presentations where we continue dialogue with a range of stakeholders. And we like to share documents, and in the past year, we've shared more of our outputs, so you can see these on our website. We are now sharing reports of those invitation-only roundtable meetings, so you can see the emerging learnings. But I wanted to focus on those roundtables, particularly the ones we undertook on the HTA regulation. So we started that by reviewing what we had done in the previous year, which was to look at what individual HTA bodies were doing in terms of providing guidance on how they would be reviewing real-world evidence. And we've seen all these guidance here from some of the big HTA bodies, so from IQVIG in Germany, from HAS in France, from ACVAS in Spain, and the NICE real-world evidence framework in England. But 2023 has been a busy year as well, because it started the year with CADETH in Canada providing incredibly detailed guidance on how to report real-world evidence. So although we may not be seeing UNETA and the EU regulation providing guidance for industry, there is guidance coming out from individual HTA bodies within the EU and beyond. And we need to keep looking at that and see if we can harmonize these guidances. We also look with interest, of course, at what EMA is doing, and we were delighted to have Kit Rose from the Scientific Advice Working Party come to one of our meetings earlier in the year and really lead a discussion about the reflection paper on single-arm trials, because of course that's where we need to see an external comparator, where we need to see real-world evidence coming in for our discussions around comparative effectiveness. And we had a great discussion with Kit about that, and we're delighted that EMA continues to be willing to engage with us. And beyond the EU, we're interested to see the developments. We know that the FDA has a big real-world evidence plan and continues to produce guidance, but the SIOMS group, which is international, has produced this draft guidance on real-world data and real-world evidence in regulatory decision-making, which makes it clear that this guidance is relevant for payers. And so we have provided an official comment on that draft guidance, and we look forward to seeing that coming out. But of course, we did look at what was coming out of UNETA 21 and the great work that they were doing around a range of issues around validity of studies and how they would be judging the evidence. But I think we all know that there is little in there. There is no specific guidance on real-world evidence, but there are mentions of it within the text, for example, on validity of clinical studies. But the other area we particularly looked at in terms of roundtables was the post-launch evidence generation. And we think this is going to be our major topic for next year, because we looked at this topic back in 2021, but since that time, we know a number of countries are now doing more outcome-based agreements, either at individual basis or with coverage with evidence development. We know that systems like Valtamed in Spain are developing, and we are learning from their developments. So we've kind of modified the recommendations we made back in 2021 that for these schemes to be effective, we need early and iterative dialogues, exactly what Patrice was saying. And we need to be clear that these schemes can't be used for everything. They are resource intensive. And what we need to do is we need to be clear about the decision-relevant uncertainties, whether it's for real-life effectiveness, for demonstration of effectiveness in subpopulations. And we then need to identify whether we can collect patient-relevant outcomes in clinical practice. And we need to link that to pricing and reimbursement and check that we can collect the data we need within a reasonable time frame. And only in those circumstances should we be implementing post-launch evidence generation. And ideally, we need to be transparent within member states about what we're doing so that we can align data collection plans and hopefully align those with EMA as well. But actually, although I've talked about early identification, we need to do this in horizon scanning, not just in joint scientific advice. We need to identify where we might need post-launch evidence generation. And what we've been touching on earlier is data quality. It's not just about transparency of data collection. It's recognizing that real-world data are messy. So if we want to use them in analysis, we actually have to put in place monitoring process to ensure that centers are onboarded, that data quality mechanisms are in place. And we need to publish these reports and make them transparent in a clearly accessible place. And so finally, what we need to do is align all this across jurisdictions. Because what we see is that we need a purposeful approach to real-world evidence generation. in terms of the way we plan the real-world data collection, and in terms of the way we monitor the quality of that data that's coming in, and then in terms of the transparency of the analysis. And if we have this life cycle approach, we should lead to treatment optimization and improved outcomes, which can contribute to a learning and sustainable healthcare system. And I think we will continue this discussion after the break. So thank you very much for your attention. We will break now until 11:25, and I'm hoping that the second coffee machine is mended so that we can have a little bit more efficiency in that. But thank you all for your engagement this morning. I'm sorry to have to break up that chat, but as you've now realized, real-world evidence for decisions works because it has very strict facilitators that make sure that everybody has a chance to collaborate. And it's really my pleasure now to introduce our next session. And what we've realized in the last year is that although we think about the life cycle of real-world evidence generation, there's an element that we've been missing. And in this session, we will talk about early access with really the most recent research and implementation opportunities. So let's move to Entella Zoxi. Entella is a member of our steering group, and she's a pharmacologist at the University of the Sacred Heart in Rome. And she's going to talk to us about some research she's been doing looking at early access. And if we could move to Entella's first slide, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, and for the invitations to talk about early access schemes in relation to HTA. This work was start with some considerations at Italian perspective that we are doing as part of ISPOR Italy Rome channel regarding what is the actual early access schemes that we use now in the HTA and payer perspective, and how this schemes and these programs can be aligned in the future. As we know, all that the early access schemes now are very important, and the purposes of early access are to provide treatment options in advance. We talked before about rare disease, so orphan designations or orphan medicinal products. So the early access is one of the most important. Sorry, I'm not doing nothing. Okay, so it's one of the options in advance of the standard codified pathway. In order to treat patients, I'm moving without slides, to move patients as early as possible, especially in the rare disease, so in very rare conditions, to anticipate treatments, looking with the clinical trials that we have currently, but also to but also to generate evidence in parallel to support the clinical trials. So earlier access, it's an important tool that we use at regulatory level, but also at national level. And this is one of the concerns or one of the critical points that we have to discuss. So the early access do not exclude evaluations by regulations, regulatory bodies and HTAs. And sometimes we give the opportunity of the early access to support the clinical trials development with new data, real world evidence, especially in the phase 2 or 3 and market authorizations. So with this, all this activity that include inside the scientific advice, regulatory and HTA parallel, the launch of the drug with a certain uncertainty, clinical or economic one, real-world data in the post-marketing, managed change agreement, and so on. So this progressive authorizations life cycle, looking this particular pathway, we can consider how the early access its positioning in this progressive authorizations. I don't need the glass here. So, we start with the definitions. We know that there are different possibility of the early access tools, and starting from the regulatory tools, the compassionate use programs is one of these tools that we use in the early access. Also, in the compassionate use is included also the name-based compassionate use, so it's passions-based treatment. Compassionate use, by the way, it's linked with sometimes with the EMA recommendations. Yes, thank you. The next slide, please. The EMA recommendations, but we know that the compassionate use is the responsibility is under the national authorities. So member states now can handle individually the compassionate use, and this kind of process and evaluations and I can say approval of this compassionate use programs is under the competence of national authority. So starting from this, the next slide, please. Okay. So as I mentioned before, compassionate use program or expanded access program is one of the possibilities. Then other regulatory tools that EMA launched, in order to accelerate the process in case of high unmet need or clinical priority in the public space, so accelerate assessment that is linked also with the PRIME scheme, conditional market authorization, so that it's one of the approval the most interesting, I can say, in terms of so how to handle then the clinical uncertainties, and that's why the conditional market authorizations and also exceptional circumstances, that is another particularity of the approval in case of very rare disease. It's linked then with the post-marketing safety and effectiveness studies, but also real data generally with the implementations in an adaptive concept with managed change agreement or performance-based risk-sharing agreement. So looking this, next slide, please. Looking this picture, now, as I said before, compassionate use program is, we can have CHMP opinion on compassionate use, but this tools, it's linked specifically on member states, so national authorities can handle this compassionate use. I highlighted here in red that in general medicines that are not authorized are first made available through clinical trials. So this remain, by the way, the first step to treat patients, and patients should always be considered for inclusion in trials before being offered a compassionate use program. By the way, as we see now in this also a review that we are doing on early access scheme that include not only early access before market authorizations, but also if we include in this definitions also another window range, the pricing and reimbursement decisions. Now we have different strategy. Next slide, please. So this is the review that we are doing on early access as part of the ISPO Rome chapter. So we individuate in this international framework, literature evidence, and also French case, but I'm not talking about this because we have another presentations after me. Two typology of countries. Countries with early access scheme financed by the public health system, and countries with only compassionate use programs or schemes that are not financed by public healthcare system. Next slide, please. So in this picture, starting from the clinical trials versus the patient's access, so availability of the drug after the HTA and payer decisions, and including here also the reassessment of that specific medicinal, we can see two possibilities of the early access schemes. Obviously, the first one that include the phase between clinical trials and market authorizations, market authorization step, it's the most obvious. So before market authorizations, we can have compassionate use programs, but also national tools that are put in place in this phase. But also in our discussions and our definitions, we would like also to include another early access that is before the HTA approval, so price decisions. And this is very typical Italian specificity that complete the pictures of these definitions on early access schemes. And next slide, please. And if we look specifically before market authorizations, in Italy, we have different laws, and specifically on the real-world data, you can see that it's mandatory to collect informations, monitoring and data transmissions on clinical and economic monitoring, specifically for the first tool that is called early access plus off-label use at 648 of 96 law. That it's the most important law that regulate the early access in Italy, because not only for the requirement, in the necessity of the unmet need, lack of the treatment alternatives, the scientific evidence, positive results from phase 2 clinical trials, but also because this kind of early access is reimbursed by National Health Service. So this is it's reimbursed by National Health Service, and sometimes for this typology of the early access, we collect also information, so real-world data and registries. The other laws that specifically are for the early access include similar requirements, but for example, in terms of payer perspective, this is also paid by IFA, but we don't have any specifications on real-world data. So this is concerns, and that's why this work that we are doing in Italy is to try to align all this early access, with the typology of these laws, the regulate actually, but also to align, and we are inspiring also on French experience on this. Next slide, please. So, and I would like here to report that, yes, early access is important for us because we start 15 years ago this experience, huge experience on IFA registries, and we launched the first registry with early access. So the case of trastuzumab in the early stage of breast metastatic anticipate the EMA label, so in an early context, reimbursed by National Health Service, and we start the collection of this data in a 648 registry. Then after the EMA approval, now we change the labeling of registries, and we start then the collections of informations in cancer area for different drugs in solid tumors, and the story on registries, you know it very well. So that's why early access, it's a sort of indicator that can anticipate innovations, and thanks of registries regulate also in a dynamic way the assessment of the drug, specifically thanks of the data collections, but also anticipate the treatment for our patients. Next slide, please. So, and if we would like to simplify a little bit the picture, in this pathway, starting from clinical trials to the reassessment of the single drug, we can see that remain, by the way, the compassionate use is one of the most important exercise of early access in this pathway. In parallel, and these are based on numbers that we have currently in Italy, the national early access tools with real-world data, so it's a HTA or payer assessment, remain, by the way, a possibility. The number is not so high because currently we have 7 IFA registries with a 648 law and only 1 for registries of 5% of national fund. But if we look then, how this early access can impact, in the recognitions of the innovations, in the pricing and reimbursement process, this we can see in the next slide, please, because this is very important. So drugs that are, for example, in this case, you can see that are recognized as fully innovative, so they are reimbursed by National Health Service, but also in terms of the recognitions of innovations are fully innovative or conditional innovations. Now you can see that this all, again, it's included with post-marketing data collection. So these are, you can see, full conditional recognitions of the innovations. We have appropriateness registries in some cases, but also appropriateness registries with outcome-based, so performance-based sharing agreement. So this is something, I mean, in terms of, it's a work in progress to understand also how the early access in a dynamic way can accelerate the process to treat patients as soon as possible in an unmet need, but also how this early access now can impact then in the pricing and reimbursement process. Registries or real-world data are important. The questions here is the qualifications of this data, so the quality of this data. And the second point is how this early access in the future could be accepted considering the new regulations on HTA. So how the early access process, that it's mostly national process, can be then aligned, merged with the new HTA regulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Entella. And particular thanks for dealing with the technical difficulties there. And Entella's given us a very good overview there of the different definitions we see in different countries, the potential for real-world data. And we're going to deep dive now into one country, and it's our pleasure to have Camille Thomasson, who is Head of Real-World Evidence Coordination Unit at HAS in France. Thank you, Camille.
So I'm Camille Thomasson. I'm the head of the Real-World Evidence Coordination Unit in the HTA department for the French National Authority for Health. So now you have 2 different options for early access. You have the option that is before marketing authorization, but you also have the option of early access after marketing authorization. So all these 2 processes are slightly different in the sense that for the early access authorization, before marketing authorization, you have the involvement either of the CHMP or the ANSM. And also the HAS. And for the early access authorization, you only have the involvement of HAS. Then you have the pricing negotiation that comes after the HTA assessment by HAS. So I will explain further for the new reform, but it's a process that is led by HTA bodies in France. So that's a specificity in coordination with the regulator. Then after you have the decision for reimbursement and registrations. Here you have all the opportunity to request for real-world data. So outside the scope of early access, so HS can request for additional real-world data at the time of the first assessment, but for reassessment and also at the time of reassessment. So I will explain here why this reform was put in place. It was first to accelerate access to the patient, because now you have decisions that are taken in 77 days. That's the mean for decision of early access. You have a full coverage of the products from the initial decision of early access, that is very important for fast access. So this decision is led by HTS, so it's the HTA decision body. The work is always done in cooperation with the regulator. So you have here the 5 eligibility criteria. I will go fast on this criteria because it's already explained in our documents that you can find in our websites. So the 5 criteria are is that the product should have an acceptable preliminary benefit-risk ratio. So either an advice from the French national authorities or either a commission decision. The disease should be serious, rare, or debilitating. The product should respond to an unmet need, that is to say you have no treatment or only unsatisfactory treatment available. The access to the treatment cannot be delayed, and the treatment is assumed innovative, and it's important to underline that this criteria is analyzed compared to the current standard of care. So we published very recently in October a 2-year review of early access program in France. So you can see that in these 2 years we have 98 positive early access decision. Oncology is the main therapeutic area, which is not surprising. For this decision, we already have 86 dossiers that have been evaluated for routine reimbursements. And you can see that for this dossier, you have at least a minor therapeutic progress recognized for 78%. So you can see that it has a direct impact on price negotiations. You may also know that the average time between the early access decision and inscription is 9 months. So it's really fast also. And we can question the concept also of early access, because we can see that it's not so early before the routine reimbursements. So what are the requirements on real-world data? Because it was also an objective of the reform, is that to have a systematic data collection for pre-authorization early access. So this data collection is mandatory for each patient, is not on a sample of patients, it's for each patient included in the early access program. It's in the format of a minimum data set. So it's not an extensive data collection, but it's focused on patient characteristics, the conditions of use of the product, the efficacy, of course, including patient perspective with a PROM that is mandatory, except in situations where it's not appropriate. And of course, safety is monitored via some dedicated fichier to fill in, or the national system of pharmacovigilance. So here you can find we have developed at HS with ANSM a model for collection of the data. So this model increased previsibility for the industry in the format of the data to be collected. I also remind you that these data are collected under care routine conditions. It's not a research protocol, and these data are supportive of the data from the clinical trials. The pharmaceutical companies are responsible for data collection and for financial compensation to the hospital for this data collection. And these data eventually have to be submitted to HS for initial assessment for reimbursement, and also for reassessment of the reimbursement, but also for continuation of the early access. That's important also to note. Every year you have a reassessment for the early access based on this data. So rapidly on the protocol we have set up for these 98 protocols, 98 early access, sorry. So you have efficacy data collection for 52 protocols with a PRO for 32 protocols. It's important also to note that data collection based on a registry, not so much. You have only 6 early access programs based on registries. Some are coming for the future months, but it's still a small number. So integration of PROM is really important. Here you have some example of PROMs that have been used in this data collection. So how can we optimize the data for their use in reimbursement? It's really a pregnant question. As I said, early enough access is important to have the time to gather the data for the initial assessment for reimbursement. If you start collecting the data at the time of the European Commission decision, then you have the assessment for reimbursement that is in 3 months later. It's really, really short to collect data and to have this available for the dossier for reimbursement. Up to now, we have only a handful of dossiers, around 10, that have made available early access data for the initial reimbursement. So it's very few. So you have to have the data that are of good quality, that are exhaustive. So missing data, it's important to lower the rate of missing data. You must adapt the methodology for the analysis of this data. For example, if you use proxy as outcomes, it's a different way of analysis that in clinical trials. It's important also to have the expertise from the clinicians, also from the patient association for the PROM choice. And simplification of data collection for the hospitals is also the key. That's why at HTS, we really strongly encourage to use the existing data sources to collect this data to alleviate the burden for the clinician. And of course, to make the most useful of this data, you need to think of reuse of the data for research purposes, and for example, reuse of the data in the context of indirect comparison, for example, with external control arm, or link with other databases. Thank you.
Thanks very much to Camille. Camille, do take a seat on the stage because you're going to be joined by a couple of discussants, and Tella, please do come up as well. So I'm delighted to have Yoda Kok, who I've already mentioned, who's former CEO of INAMI, and Andre Vidal Pinheiro, who's Vice President of Head of Patient Value and Access UCAN for Global Pricing and Access at Takeda. So I'll turn to Yo first. Yo, you've heard those presentations about new schemes on early access, the potential for real-world data. What's the view from Belgium?
You do the slide. If you phone then, please, because I have to check there. Yeah, okay, it's a green line. The position, it's not a position of Belgium, but what's happening in Belgium? Let's go back to the past. Our first early access scheme, and I'm not talking about compassionate use schemes, was elaborated 10 years ago, in 2014. And the point of entry was, how can we find solutions for unmet medical needs? That was the point of entry. And that's also the point of entry, I think, for early access schemes. Otherwise, you have the rationale behind is you have to bring to the patients as fast as possible when there's no alternative and we are in unmet medical need. Question is, of course, what is unmet medical need? That's another conference. Let's be clear. That's the topic of another conference. We did it by fixing a list together with different stakeholders, industry, payers, and so on, and which was approved by the board of the social health insurance. A list in which the condition of eligibility was you have to be on the list, and of course there should not be a therapeutic alternative for the treatment. And the methodology was take cohort decisions for a group of patients which were responding to this criteria. But of course, someone has to enter an early access scheme and a demand for an early access scheme. In these 10 years, we have seen 3 decisions, 3 cohort decisions, not more than that. Thus, I've left the NME and they said, okay, what a mess he left behind. We should make a reform. And this we are now, I think, in the reform, and it's Pedro who led the roadmap, which is figuring out a new system of early and fast access, equitable access, which is where the principles have been defined, but the legislation has to be elaborated yet. The eligibility criteria to come, and I'm still speaking about the post-CGMP early access schemes, are that, of course, this product should be involved as a prime status or an accelerated access procedure, but also the condition of the industry to and the manufacturer to introduce afterwards a reimbursement file. Otherwise, you can say, okay, we will try out and then we withdraw. No, the financing of this mechanism has not changed. It's in fact lump sums which are paid with regard to different categories of products, lump sums which can be doubled when for the first number of patients. This decision will be taken by a special working group in which patients are present. And it's explicitly mentioned that the decisions to be integrated in an early access schemes are not have any impact on the reimbursement decision, which is coming later. There's no financial link. It's an independent decision. And of course, these lump sum payments have no relationship with price discussions and so on. It's a one-stop shop because formerly there was also the regulatory and the reimbursement, the payer who should come in. What is important now in this reform is also the creation of a real-world evidence platform or a real-world evidence initiative, which has the aim to figure out and to make data sets, performance indicators. It's named in this roadmap, and this therefore it's clear we see that early dialogues are necessary, and as early as possible, I think it's necessary to bring people together to bring these data sets. And of course, when inclusion comes afterwards in the list and be a reimbursement, there will be payments in additional by the social health insurance and rebates by the manufacturer when the conditions of performance are not met. This, I think it's a valuable instrument, and if I may a little bit cross the border, I stop. Okay, thanks. That will be.
We'll come back to that later in discussion. Yeah, thank you for that. And so you are there talking about clarity in terms of criteria, which you have, which France has. So we could talk about that, about do we have the same criteria? Could we collaborate on criteria? You also mentioned issues around a kind of ensuring equitable access and also financing issues. I wonder what the health technology developers think about this scheme. Give us a perspective from Takeda, Andre.
Sure, thank you, Karen. And I think overall, in a landscape where sometimes
It's on.
It's on?
Closer.
Can you hear me? 1, 2, 3?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, in an environment where sometimes the delay between regulatory approval and reimbursement approval can be long, early access mechanisms are absolutely critical, especially to ensure that patients at the highest need receive treatment and life-saving and life-altering technologies as soon as possible. So we also know from the cases from France that it can be done. It can have an impact on the HTA assessment, so it's very positive. And to this end, I also commend the efforts from Belgium in terms of setting up the structure. And speaking of structure, the other benefit of early access, well-structured, protocolized with clear rules, inclusion and exclusion criteria, start and stop, is that it allows real-world evidence to seamlessly continue after the reimbursement decision. So you don't have to set up after the product is reimbursed. It's already on, it's ongoing. Advantages of being able to assess, for instance, intra-patient comparisons, how the patients were doing before and after they received the new technology. So it is quite promising in general. The challenge in my mind is that the early access program, as we see it, as we see them today, address today's environment. But what about when we have the JCA coming at our doorstep? Because as Camille explained, sometimes the delta between setting up early access data collection and the reimbursement decisions can be short. With the JCA, is going to be even shorter. So either we start having discussions in terms of early access even earlier, or alternatively, what is the role of early access or collection of real-world evidence pertaining to early access? And this is the point where I think it's needed to remind everyone that at this point in time, and maybe in a couple of months, 3 months, we'll have more clarity. There's no clarity in how we are going to manage the PICO situation, how different countries may have different PICOs, different standards of care, and how the approach today that we have of a robust study will try to address multiple PICOs at the same time. So decisions that are being taken today or studies that are already ongoing may or may not conform to the future regulations. So maybe there is a room for not only real-world evidence in general, but especially early access to complement some of those discussions. Even if we can't do that at the JCA level, at least at the member state level, may be an interesting option. So maybe a call for action for this group is how can we bring this topic to the ongoing broader JCA and preparedness discussion, the Implementation Act, and hopefully come with a proposal that will serve obviously both patients in accelerating access, allow manufacturers to better plan how their clinical development plans, and most importantly, also for the HTAs to know what they can count on and have a good discussion on the levels of evidence at the different stages of the process.
Thank you, Andre. And we are going to open up for questions now. So, we have one right from the back. And I'm just going to reflect there on what you said, Andre, that you made an important statement there about the potential of early access to be an important part of the continuum of evidence generation, and particularly in a member state that may not have been involved in a clinical trial, for example, to create system preparedness for data collection, which I think is a very important element as we talked earlier about the challenges of collecting data in clinical practice. So preparedness is a key element. And a question from the back.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Yanis Natsis from the European Social Insurance Platform, ESIP. A question for, all the panelists. What do you see, especially based on the French and the Italian experience, but also for you in Belgium? What is the effect on the prices and on the savings? Because at the end of the day, this has to do also with money, and especially with the experience that we have in Italy with the registries. You have 15 years of experience, as you said. So where are we with that? Because that is quite important. And then, of course, early access means incomplete data sets that we accept this increased uncertainty, which means unmet scientific questions that need to be answered, that hopefully at some point. And what is also, again, the correlation with the price that you see? Thank you very much.
Would anybody like to take that, Antana? Do you want to keep it?
Yes, thank you for your questions. That it's the point. I think it's the most important critical point to answer on how this data collections in the early access can then impact in the pricing reimbursement. My answer is very simple. We don't have any information on this detailed information because these informations are included in confidential agreement between companies and the authorities. But I can say absolutely that in case we have a 648, so early access registries, and in some cases we anticipate with implementations of performance-based sharing, even in early access situations, the process then in the price definitions and the negotiations of after the market authorizations, it's more fluid, easy, I can say, because you have already a registry that collects data, and you can, in a dynamic way, adapt your previous situations in early access. And I don't have the time to show you because we have few cases, but that demonstrate that this complexity, how you can handle early access versus post-marketing authorizations in a dynamic way. You can adapt your data collections based on performing the clinical trials, other information that are coming from the market authorizations. Even you can implement it, you can adapt your performance-based sharing agreement. And I just give you an example on the combinations or MEK and BRAF inhibitor in the metastatic melanoma. So we handle all these progressive authorizations from the monotherapy of the BRAF inhibitors in the metastatic melanoma, combining the compassionate use and the 648 law that it's under the National Health Service versus another combo that improve the progression-free survival. So payment by results was very challenging, very complex to implement, but it is demonstrations that the adaptive concept, it's feasible. Certainly, as Karen said before, we can implement this kind of agreement always. We have to need to prioritize, which are the most important, where is the unmet need, the most interesting, and also in parallel the feasibility analysis, because you cannot do this kind of data collections, especially in Italy. We have national data collections, mandatory for the physicians and pharmacists, regions to individuate centers, reassessment at patients level. This is very huge. So this is another, considerations to say, because also at the end of the story, the price definitions can impact, on this consideration. So appropriateness registries, by the way, it's part of the price definitions. So this the company knows very well. So that's why the component of registries in the contract of pricing and reimbursement, it's a very, very valid instrument tool, and very important.
Thank you, Angela. Would anybody else like to comment? Come here.
I think it's important to retain that if you don't have enough time to collect data from early access before the initial reimbursement, it will be difficult to really act on the definition, for example, of clinical added value by our committee that impact directly the price. So that's one point. It's important to have a really an anticipation of the data collection as early as possible. But it's also important to know that at the time of reassessment, it's really possible to influence the clinical added value in complement of additional data. For example, if you have follow-up data from your clinical trial, then you had, for example, an indirect comparison based on data from early access program that is of good quality, you can have an impact on the clinical added value and then on the price. The examples are rare, but it's feasible. So that's why it's really important to anticipate the data collection, either if you want to set up an external cohort for comparison with the clinical data, or if you want to set up a real-world data collection with the products. So there is different action you can take with this real-world data that are, unfortunately, if this data stay as a non-comparative short-term data, the way they will be used by the committee will remain at a low level.
Thanks. Any further comments from you or Andre?
Yes, abstract made of the early access programs. Out of the experience of MOCA last 10 years, we know that when early dialogues are made on an appropriate way, the chance and the ratio of reimbursement will go up. The question is not the price. The first question is, will we reimburse? That's the first question. Is there a place for reimbursement? Is this real and unmet need? And we see in early dialogues that, and the 35 files which were treated by MOCA show clearly. For the moment, there is some analysis made, I think, by the University of Utrecht, by Wim Gutsch, showing that, of course, when you compare the actual situation, which is a blunt rebate, with a situation in which you have more information, more data, which allows to test a little bit also in real life what's happening, and that's the gap between what's has been seen in clinical trials and what is the clinical effectiveness in real life. We know that there is a gap. Okay, when you demonstrate that, that's clear. And of course, the question is, and that's a tough one. How can you fix a price as manufacturer when you have all the data on board? That's for me a no-brainer, but it's an important one. It's a brainer. In fact, you have to reflect on that. How do you make your price when you have not all the information on board, except from some small trials? But that's not the case in the early access schemes because you have huge uncertainties. I think that's the thing we have to figure out. How can we, and that's all the discussion of payment models and so on, and new payments models which are on board. With regard, if I may, as payer, but also payer, the word solidarity is one of the notions we use frequently. I think there is also place to align all these early access schemes, because what we see is that there is a difference with the access for patients when there is an early access scheme or not. Thus, you made already a difference in the first stage. Thus, I think there is place for alignment, and we know that not in every country early access schemes are available. But it will be an enrichment of data when common data sets in different countries and different settings and hospitals. It's not about countries, it's merely about hospitals, and we have our European reference networks in some case, when we could do so. Thus, I think there is work to do to improve the situation. Is there need for an early access scheme? I think yes. But we should design it on an appropriate way, also taking into account all the elements we have already discussed.
Thank you, Jo. Andre?
Yeah, and just to complete, yes, I completely agree with that. It's also worth to remember there is no early access programs for fifth to market in a given mechanism of action, right? So we're talking about disease areas with high unmet needs and lack of alternative treatments. So in a way, the early access in France has been very, very promising because it helps reducing the risk in terms of quantifying the added benefit of a product. And yes, in terms of what part is comparative, what part is not, the fact is that if we look at the general approvals of additional benefit in France, the rate is not 80%, right? So clearly, the conjunction of the early access, reducing the uncertainty, the high unmet needs, the innovative treatment is working in a formula that just simply reduces the risk of accepting reimbursement, which then, of course, then translates on price and allows further real-world evidence, contracting, etc. So it's not just the early access per se, it's a combination of things and integration. And I would also echo the point about having a common approach, because right now there are not a lot of countries that have such a systematic approach to early access. And I think everyone would benefit from a little bit more structure or more cases.
And especially for the real world evidence gathering.
Thank you. We've got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to just wrap up with a question which perhaps isn't what you were expecting, but I like to surprise you, because I want to pick up on Andre's point that I think there's a really interesting question about the timing of early access. And Camille, you raised this, that it's only sort of 9 months on average. And Andre, you said, but with the JCAs, with the joint clinical assessments, that time frame is likely to be even shorter. So what is the optimum time frame for early access to generate good quality data, and how can we achieve that? A couple of sentences from each of you to close. I'll start this in with the ladies first. Camille.
Yes, yes, I appreciate the comment for the GCA. I think the situation will be different depending on the countries. For example, in France, probably it won't have any impact because these processes are clearly separated, and we have a HTA assessment process that will not be impacted on the timing by the GCA timing, but it could be different in different countries. What I would say is use the existing data sources, anticipate with the clinician that led these data sources so they can be motivated to fill in the data and set up the data collection as early as possible and involve the patient association most of the time.
Thank you. So early dialogues and engagement of stakeholders key. Entella.
Well, timing remain a problem. We don't have any specifications in Italy, but usually when the drug is close to the market authorization, so the positive opinion for CHMP, we prefer to move versus the pricing reimbursement decision. So that's why I think that this is one of the questions that we are handling in this survey at ISPOROM chapter, because and given now the time that you have very short time to collect informations, you have to anticipate before the CHMP opinion. So this is remain, by the way, a point to do. The other problems that, as Camille said, it's a country specific. We are not using other database, to generate to collect information. So we have our own platform, and this is one of the point to put on the table. So we are using our platform. So and that's why we can then do this dynamic approach, with data collections and implementations of managed entry agreements. So it's very country specific.
Thanks, Entella. And one sentence each from Yo and Andre. Yeah.
Let's try. I think we should invest, but in general, not from Belgium, we should invest and install, I think, structured programs to collect real-world data through early access schemes, which are a basis also for HTE, but of course it's a continuum process. But we should invest in that, and of course this data discussion is worthwhile. There is also a shared responsibility of authorities and of manufacturers. I'm not saying who has to pay, that is a shared, but member states have also, as we've seen in France, that hospitals are receive subventions for it, and indeed its administrative burden, which will always be something which is clearly addressed. Thus we should install and try to figure out how
so
we can.
We need infrastructure. Andre, final word for you.
Yes, thank you. So early dialogue is important to establish trust between manufacturers and the HTAs, especially in the context of the joint clinical appraisal, that we can use the continuum of evidence to plug the potential discrepancies between the PICOs that will be assessed at the European level versus the ones that are relevant for the member state.
Thank you. I'd like to thank our panel. I think this is a discussion that we are going to continue in the coming years. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure now to invite Pedro Facon, who is the Deputy CEO of the National Institute of Health and Disability Insurance, INAMI Visiv, to the stage. And I'm not sure I have your CEO. Oops.
I have no slides, so no stress for the technical support team. But maybe first of all, I would like to express my appreciation for this platform and also for the conference being held today. I think that it's so important on this important topic of the use of evidence in decision making. That we share ideas in an informal context between authorities, industry, academics, patient organizations, professionals. It's really crucial to do so. And I also think that if I look a little bit at the life cycle of this platform, that things did change at the European level since the time you started. And if we look where we are now, there are some building blocks being put into place at the European level. We have had the joint HTA or the joint clinical assessment that will start in 25 and which will be a driver also of the topic we're discussing today. We're having the discussions on the EHDS, as was also explained by the Commission and by my Spanish colleague. And of course, we have the discussions on the pharmaceutical legislation. So things are moving. We're going forward. And as we heard also in the testimonies of countries, also they are thinking about how they can improve their procedures and also integrate better evidence in these procedures. So I think that's a positive thing. And it's important sometimes to also be positive and not only negative. When it comes to the Belgian presidency, and that's the reason why I was invited, I won't submerge you now with all kinds of information on it, but like my Spanish colleague told also, we have on the one hand the continuation of a series of regulatory processes. We will take the estafette of Spain on important topics like the EHDS, and of course the discussions on the pharmaceutical legislation will start. Also at the Belgian level, we are prepared for that discussion. So all these regulatory normal activities will take place also during the Belgian presidency. And when it comes to the more political program, the other half of the presidency, then in fact, the Belgian presidency, when it comes to health and social insurance, is a little bit built on the slogan, a Europe that cares, a Europe that prepares, a Europe that protects. And there are many topics in it. There's some continuity also in the topics that Spain put forward to the presidency. But when it comes to the topics we discussed today, then I think I want to mention the work we will do with regard to unmet need. We are developing with KCE methodologies to better define the unmet needs, not only in the pharmaceutical sector, but also beyond. And this methodology, we really want to launch that discussion. You know that Belgium also has been very active on the whole problem of shortages. And when it comes to solidarity mechanisms, the need for better monitoring of supply chains, and also the possibility of critical medicines acts and initiatives with regard to reshoring of some production capacities in Europe. This will obviously be of utter importance also for the Belgian presidency. And we want to really, influence the agenda of the next Commission, of the next Council, of the next Parliament. So I won't say much more about the presidency because in the next few months you will certainly be confronted with our actions and our conferences there. We will have in the sphere of the pharmaceuticals a very important conference on unmet needs. So we will organize that, and you suggested that idea too. So and he knows it. We will have this in the first quarter of 2023. I would like to make some reflections on what I heard this morning. I'm also here representing the payer. And the payer, I sometimes feel a little bit like Carol Beer. I don't know if anyone knows Carol Beer, but if anyone knows Little Britain, I'm a big fan of this kind of British humor. And Carol Beer said, "Computer says no." And that was the way she reacted as a bureaucrat to the questions of her clients. And sometimes I feel a little bit like payer says no. And why does the payer say no? Because in fact, we're reluctant to reimburse something where it's not completely clear, and that's also in a budgetary context where there's more and more pressure. And let's be honest, pharmaceutical expenditure is being treated a little bit more severely sometimes than other expenditure in the health insurance, just because the pharmaceutical industries are big capitalists, as you know. You need to take the sarcastic thinking if you invite me for the stage. But we often say no because we are in a position where we think that we do not have enough data to come close to the demands of the industry to pay at the level they are expecting. We also say no, or we don't say anything, because the innovation we would like to see coming to the market is not coming. So we need to, and I like the idea of the life cycle and all the different stages where real-world evidence could help to steer industry more in developing innovation for unmet needs, to improve also the preparation of the market authorization, after market authorization to better support the joint clinical assessment, and obviously during reimbursement procedures, coming up with better evidence with regard to the real value, the expected value and the real value of some products. And then obviously also in the context of conditional reimbursement and also the continuous evaluation of what is in our reimbursement scheme, being able on the basis of both clinical trials, but also on the basis of real-world evidence, to be sure or to have more certainty about what the value should be if we want to reimburse and at what level we want to reimburse. So often I feel reluctant, recalcitrant sometimes, or idle payer, and I would like to become a more risk-taking strategic purchaser or buyer that's clear. And I like the idea, but for that we need indeed to find a way to integrate real-world evidence in all these discussions, and we need to find a balance, and that's also a discussion we have with experts at Belgian level. What can be the place of real-world evidence? The immediate reaction you get is that it shouldn't lead to a situation where the golden standard of our cities is being pushed away. So we really, that's not the message that was given today, but we need to find a balance between between several types of evidence. And I like the idea also of a continuum of evidence, and we need to be clear on how different elements can be used. We need to be sure about the quality. If we want to use real-world evidence, then all the things that were said on standards, on quality standards also for real-world evidence, that's of crucial importance if we want to be able to convince everyone that we can use real-world evidence in the processes. We need to exploit the data, because what I see is that in a lot of our contracts, so the conditional reimbursement is already half of our expenditure in Belgium. So half of pharmaceutical expenditure is in negotiated contracts with secret mechanisms of budgetary agreement. And what I see is that almost all of these contracts, they contain questions to collect data, but what are we really doing with this data? I see that the teams that are on these contracts, they are mostly negotiating new contracts or prolonging contracts, but we don't have enough capacity to evaluate the existing contracts and exploiting the data that was collected in these contracts or via these contracts. So if we start to make more important the part of real-world evidence and making even more registration, etc., then we also need to have capacity to treat these data, to exploit these data. And in the end, I liked and then I will shut up, but in the end, it's like Yannis also said, what will be in the end the impact on being better able as a payer to estimate what the real value of a product is? What will we really learn of it? Will we be able to have more correct prices? Because today, sometimes we pay too much, sometimes we don't pay enough, and it's a little bit the way it works, and everybody is secret about it, so we don't really know anything about it at all. So we should be able to also measure the real impact on being better able to estimate the value and having better, more correct reimbursement, which is absolutely necessary. So these were a few reflections I have. I found it very interesting, and I would like to thank you for your investment in this initiative. And you can count on Belgium and on the Risivinami to continue our investment in the platform.
Thank you, and thank you for this. Thank you for this positive final message. We will count on you. So, now we come to the last panel discussion. You are aware that this is a meeting organized by a group. We looked outside, now we look inside. Can I ask for representatives of the steering group of that organization or of that endeavor to please join me here on stage? We have representatives from an HTA body, Nicholas Hedberg, a clinician, Marty Apro, patient representative from Eurordis, Simone Bozarelli, and again, industry or health technology developer, Anna Filonenko. So let me start, and I will start simply from where I stand, left to right. Marty, you are the first. The question is, looking at what we have done as this group, Real World Evidence for Decisions, what should be our priorities for the year 2024, which is about to start? Marty.
Now it's working. It's funny because it has a red light that usually says that it is working, but actually this one you have to press on the red light and it becomes a green light, and then it's working. Wonderful. So thank you very much for having put me as the first speaker here. As a clinician with a background in internal medicine, but a so-called specialist in cancer treatment, I followed with great interest the efforts of the whole group. When I joined, I was wondering what was I going to really do here. Yes, I do have as a background a position as past president of the European Cancer Organization, so knowing a little bit about many of the issues and having had for 2 years close discussions with the directorate, and since then continued to work with them. We have done a lot of progress, and this was very nicely summarized earlier. And there are still lots of questions that are pending from a clinician's perspective. I heard the word be positive. I am positive. I wouldn't be a cancer treatment expert if I wasn't positive. Nowadays, things are much easier, not always. They were dramatic 20 years ago. There are many situations we didn't know what to do. But looking at real-world evidence, how can it help? It's not only the real-world evidence, it's how we collect, and this was discussed today also. I heard that, well, one way of doing that is to use only the automated records. Yeah, fine, lovely. for the time being, if you go to a hospital in Sweden and to one in Italy, you can do that. But the problem is that one is in Swedish, the other is in Italian. Next point is that the one is under one automated system and the other one is another automated system, and they don't talk to each other. You can read them. And when I receive a little comment from German-speaking Switzerland for a patient, it's written in German. And this is the issue. So that's one of the problems. We have to use modern translation systems, and we also have to harmonize. And I know that this is something that's being done with what we heard about the health data space. And then the other issue is that, yes, real-world evidence, that's lovely, but then the access to the drugs, and the patients do have issues in access for the drugs. Still today, you can have some drugs which are clearly making a difference from a clinician's perspective, which are not accessible in some countries, and actually was asked to speak about that at the meeting in January in France, because they do have issues, and I was interested to hear what Camille was saying, but there's a lot to be done. So these are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And from industry perspective, we heard many times today said the word quality, and I have to confirm this is our priority as well. There is a shift from trying enthusiastically to analyze every data set you can get to really considered and well-informed studies answering relevant research questions. Yeah, so the quality will remain top priority for us as research organizations. And for that, there are many aspects which would require future development. One of the aspects is, for instance, further development of harmonized standards and methods, which would be at least consistent across the European countries and decision makers in European countries, being HTAs and as well as regulatory decision makers. So that would be a step probably in the right direction to improve the quality, incentivize the quality. The other aspect would be to continue to learn. Yeah, so we need to have more learnings from the studies and good examples which actually reduce decision uncertainty. And we definitely need to learn and have a conversation about the studies where the research funding was spent, but these studies or evidence could not contribute to informed decision. Because as it was said, there are probably examples and many examples where a pair computer said no, yeah, and the opportunity cost and the research funds diverted from the other programs, they are real in industry as well, yeah. And that's hopefully real-world evidence for decisions will be a forum for this continuous learning.
Thank you.
First of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's the time of the year where we start to look back, to look forward towards the Christmas holiday. And I look back at the first time I went into this multi-stakeholder meeting, which was at the time still Trust for RD, when we were looking at methodologies to fill in a gap. And that initiative has transformed into a much greater collaboration and a learning network. And I would like to pick up from the learning network. I wish for the real-world evidence for decision, if I understand correctly your question, I wish it to become something more than perhaps a learning network, but effectively a bridge builder. One of the key points that we have had and I've expressed in the first intervention that I did in 2018 is that at the moment, from our perspective, we see, and we saw it then, and we see even more now, an advancement in science targeting rare diseases that is incredibly moving forward. However, there is still a dichotomy with the economy and the economic element of bringing those scientific therapies to patients. Real-world evidence for decision can help fill that gap in allowing for science to transform into effective therapies for patients, considering the impact that there is on the economy and on economic end. And I stop here for the moment.
Thank you. Over to Nicholas.
Thanks. A wonderful thing with this group is that sometimes I am the HTA representative around, and in this group I'm one of 7 or 8. So we have a critical mass, and I think that the HTA problems are or challenges are at the core. So our challenges are the default for the solutions. Normally, it would be the regulatory challenges, and that's not bad, but
yes,
in the comparisons, ours are even more difficult normally. The backside of that is that Pedro took a lot of my reflections, but I will try to give some others then, but I totally agree with a lot of what you said. And coming back to this, payers say no. I also have to include what Giannis said, and to clarify that payers don't always say no. Payers have to say, yes, we are not a payer, but payers need to spend their money or they're out of the business. Payers want to spend their money, at least public payers, but they want to spend them on the right things. And we need to remember that. And to say what should the priorities be for next year, where do I want this group to come? We are kind of aligned when we look forward, and still, Gianni's question is kind of unanswered. What happened at the end of the day? I think we must simulate the follow-up conference when we, based on data, based on an application, might be a result of an early access program, say we must gather data. Everyone is aligned, everyone is agreed, but what happens when we meet 5 years after and say, now we're going to look at the data? My claim is that at that conference, there's always at least half of the group that says, we cannot use this data for decision-making. So we must first have a discussion club and try to find out which kind of decisions do we think and can we agree that we can make based on real-world evidence. We've heard already today that there are certain limitations. We hear very rightfully from France that it cannot be instead of RCTs. No. We hear in the questions, I assume, from companies on Slido, what are you going to use the results for? A bit anxious. Are we only expecting these data to be hypothesis generating? Or are we thinking that they can be used to decrease uncertainty on already established knowledge? Or do we actually think that it can answer new questions? And then either confirm or contradict pivotal data from randomized controlled trials that didn't really fit the purpose for HTA. Because I think those three will give completely different results in the follow-up conference. And we must still come together and discuss what would be good enough for us. Everyone, the regulators, could these follow-up data eventually alter our decisions, even though it was gathered for HTA purposes? Patients, can I accept as an ultimate result a delisting because it didn't prove to be good enough? It can be good for some of my patients, but in the total, and once again, payers don't want to say no, but sometimes they have to because they need to spend their money on the right place. Companies, are you willing to accept these data, or are you going to explain them to be dirty? And HTAs, of course, would we accept them to increase prices eventually? I think that is where we need to have the discussion. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you for giving us this interesting catalog, or the beginning of a catalog of what we could use this for as payers. We do have time for at least one more question. Is there any suggestions, questions from the floor? Maybe ideas what this group should be doing in 24? No? Yes.
Antonella.
You need a microphone.
Thank you. So I'm Antonella Cardone, the CEO of Cancer Patients Europe, and Cancer Patients Europe is a pan-European all cancer types patient association. So it's a very interesting discussion. I would like to make a reflection on the fact that we are in a situation now where we needed to discuss also the level of uncertainty that the payers and HTA bodies in general are ready to take into consideration. Because there is no way to go back. I mean, like now we are, in terms of innovative treatments for rare diseases, but also for cancer, like ATMPs, gene therapies, CAR T-cell. So those are therapies that cannot, like the evidence on those therapies cannot be based on the traditional randomized clinical trials. For a lack of number of patients in terms of rare diseases, but also for ethical issues for, like, for instance, pediatric cancer treatments. So we need to look at alternative ways of gathering evidence, alternative ways of payment models. So I think this is also a discussion that we need to put forward in the coming months with the payers. Thank you.
So we're coming to a close of that session. You know the rules by now. 1 sentence, 1 final comment for each panelist. I will start now this in the opposite direction. Nicholas.
I will just say what we need to do. We need to simulate this follow-up conference 5 years ahead of any plan, any consensus planning for follow-up data. And the project can also probably gather some examples. When have real-world data capture actually changed price? Which examples are there out there? Can any of the Italian ones be found public? Can any of the Swedish results be found, etc.?
Okay, Karen, I hope you were listening careful. We just got a homework to do for next year. Simone.
That would be a first if a payer decide to increase their payment, and that would be a great welcome addition. I have 5 words for you, Karen, for next year, where real-world evidence would be very important. Align, anticipate, advance, adopt, and adapt. Align the processes where real-world evidence will be relevant. Anticipate evidence generation in the cases where those uncertainties that Antonella was talking about are needed. Advance the methodologies and adopt those methodologies that are quality, and the example that we've seen this morning are very encouraging. And finally, adapt, and in particular in rare diseases, the question of adapting to the evidence that we have is specifically important to ensure that patients have access, timely access to the scientific developments we have. Thank you.
Anna?
Thank you very much. I will try to be short. I think cumulative learning from the evidence would be important and the key for us to learn from real-world evidence, not only for the decision-making at one time point, but also to learn how to do better clinical trials. Yeah. How to improve healthcare as the new evidence become available. So that would be important. And with that, education of the community, learning and understanding about real-world evidence, about the biases, what is good evidence, what is not so good evidence, that will remain important, I think, for this community as well.
Thank you. Marty, last word.
Thank you. I would like to add a perspective. We heard that there is a need for money. There's a lot of money out there. OECD has shown to us that 30% of all healthcare things that we do are pure waste. So there's a lot of money to be found trying to improve on the systems that we use. And I think that this is something that we should add to our plans next year.
Thank you very much. With that, I hand over to Karen.
Thank you. I'd just like to say thank you to the panel. We have been taking notes. We've noted align, anticipate, advance, adopt. We've looked at a new potential moving from a network to a bridge. And I think that has really interesting alignment with what we talk about in HTA being the bridge to decision making. And I also think we need to be more open about kind of some of the risk sharing that we each need to take. And that hasn't been mentioned today, but we have trade-offs to take with the decisions and with the evidence we can generate. And we perhaps need to be more open about some of the trade-offs we're taking there. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for participating and for your work as our steering group to lead us. And we will be taking these further conversations forward. So please thank our panelists very much.
Yeah. Do you want to introduce? Yeah. So, thank you again. Wonderful. Please keep your seats. I'll be short. Yeah. So we come to our final concluding remarks, and Karen said, can I share some reflections? And I want to share 2 technical and 1 personal reflections with you. What I heard today is, so we live in this healthcare ecosystem with different players. Here is that train of real-world evidence that is leaving the station. Who is on board and who is not yet on board? The industry has always been on board. They have their interests. They follow that. Fine. Regulators have understood the potential value of this for their decision-making. They are on board. Patients, I would say, are largely on board. Some are skeptical, but the bigger organizations, I think they understand that there is something in for us patients. Good. 2 players in the healthcare ecosystem are not yet on board. The first one is, I'm sorry to say, my own constituency. And I follow on what Pedro said, what Nicholas just said. We should take an interest. We should be in the driving seat of that. We need to understand what we pay for. What is the right price? And yet, we sometimes still drag our feet. Maybe for us, we should be the next frontier, sort of, to take charge of this and to shape it in our way. The reason is because we're still payers and not buyers. And you know that distinction is important. But there's a second group, and then that brings me to my second technical observation. That second group is healthcare providers. We've heard it time and again today, and at every conference I go to, real-world data are missing, messy, lousy. Okay. We are too polite to say, because we're all in polite society, we do this, we say the data is bad. Well, the data don't generate themselves. Someone generates those lousy data. Who is it? Well, physicians and other healthcare providers. Is that true? There is an accusation in that. We have to be clear about that. Is it true? And the sad answer, I have to say, is, well, largely yes. Why is that? And I can tell you my own experience. I grew up as a practicing physician. I was trained to treat my patients, do the right thing, give the right prescription, etc. And then there was this ugly little piece of my job called documentation. And it was a useless burden. I had to do it. I did it reluctantly, so did all my colleagues. And the worst thing was a patient had died, and I still had to write down what happened, and I never saw the use. And that was perfectly rational, because that patient was dead. It was on a paper record. The whole thing would go to an archive. No one would ever see it. Why should I do a good job? There's no good reason for that. But the world has changed. Now we have computer entries. We could make use of that data, even if it is a dead patient. Maybe now is the time to rethink what is the practice of medicine. Maybe the practice of medicine should be that documentation, which is another word for data entry, should be part of the medical endeavor, part of the medical service that we provide to our patients. Maybe that is something that we underestimated in our discussion. Some physicians are very good at that, some still not. And that's why we have that data issue problem. Should we not motivate physicians or other healthcare providers specifically to do the documentation piece right by saying this has societal value for all of us? Maybe that is something we have been underestimated. And that question, who pays for the data? Is that something worth paying? Just as much as a prescription and any other service that a physician provides. That is a conversation we need to have. My last comment is a personal one. I have 2 children that I had educated. I now have a grandchild that big. I hope I will help educate her. And what I hope to teach them, both my children and my grandchildren, is learn from your own experience. Learn from your own mistakes. If you don't do that, you will repeat your mistakes. What do you call a friend or a colleague who never learns from his or her mistakes? You call them an idiot. Sorry. That goes for individuals, that goes in families, that goes in organizations, even in entire sectors of the economy. My understanding is, I don't know whether it's true, that the airline industry is fantastic at that. Some incident happens, they immediately learn. There is one sector in our economy where we are legally barred from learning because we shouldn't make secondary use of data, and that is healthcare. And I would say that is idiotic. Maybe it's time to change that attitude and say a healthcare system that doesn't learn is a stupid healthcare system. That would be my final reflection. With that, I hand back to Karen.
I knew I had to give Hans-Georg the last word because, of course, he would sum everything up brilliantly and leave us with a challenge. And I just want to say thank you, obviously, to all the speakers who've contributed to the day, to you in the room, to those online, but particularly to the Secretariat. And I'd like them to stand up, please, because I'd like to give them a round of applause because an awful lot of work has gone into today. And really, we are an efficient learning network because of the work that these guys do. So thank you to all colleagues at FIPRA for that. And now it's just time to say we will take on board your reflections. Indeed, we have a steering group meeting later this afternoon. So the work keeps going. We keep collaborating. But do join us in 2024 online. And hopefully we'll be here in November in 2024 in Brussels again, and we'll see what's happened. It will be an exciting year, and of course, we'll see what's coming out of the European Health Data Space in the next couple of days. So thank you, safe journeys home, and there will be some lunch provided. Thank you, everyone.